mind-boggling to mind-blowing, the brain is most certainly the most complex organ of the human body. My name is Amna Iqbal, and ever since I took an AP Psychology course in my freshman year of high school, I've grown a deep love and fascination for the human brain. Hopefully by the end of the speech, you'll share that interest too. Today, I'm going to be talking about the anatomy and function of the human brain, and I'm going to be previewing the definition of traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Firstly, I'm going to be giving a rundown on the 4 lobes of the brain. Following that, I'm going to be talking about the deeper structures of the brain, or the midbrain, the brainstem. Lastly, I'm going to be discussing traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and previewing the signs and symptoms that may come with it. Let's delve into the general sections of the human brain. According to information I found on Medical News' today's article titled What to Know About the Brain, which was reviewed and updated on February 10, 2023, under the subsection titled Cerebral Cortex, it is said that the cerebral cortex amounts for 50% of the total mass of the human brain. Under the same subsection, it is said that there are 4 lobes of the human brain: the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobes. The frontal lobe is said to be responsible for an individual's personality, judgment, and motor skills. And as the name suggests, it's in the front of the brain. Secondly, there's the parietal lobe, which is the highest point of the brain, so it's the top of your head. This is responsible for some sensory stuff, like pain, touch, and temperature. The temporal lobe is underneath the frontal and parietal lobes, and is responsible for understanding language. It also plays a role in audio and visual interpretation. There's also a very crucial part of the brain in the temporal lobe, called the hippocampus, which is responsible for our memory. Lastly, there's the occipital lobe, which is in the back of our head, and it takes in visual input and interprets it. Something I find interesting about the occipital lobes is that the right eye is connected to the left occipital lobe, and the left eye is connected to the right occipital lobe. That's kind of how our brain works. The right hemisphere is responsible for the left side of our body, the left hemisphere is responsible for the right side of our body. Now that we talked about the cerebral cortex on the top of the brain, it is time to move into the deeper structures of the brain, or the brainstem. There are 3 main parts of the brainstem: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. An article by Mayfield Clinic's Brain and Spine titled The Anatomy of the Brain, which was reviewed by Tanya Hines in April of 2018, it says that the hypothalamus, which is located just above the midbrain, controls the autonomic system, which is responsible for our thirst, hunger, sexual response, and sleep. The pituitary gland, also called the master gland, is responsible for secreting a hormone that helps with the growth in our muscles and bones, hormones that help with our sleep, and hormones that help with our reproductive development. Now moving on to the second part of the brainstem, we come to the pons. In the pons, there is something called the pineal gland, which is responsible for our circadian rhythm, biological clock, and releases a hormone called melatonin, which makes us sleepy. The article by Mayfield Clinic also states that the thalamus acts as the storage unit or relay station for all the information that enters and exits the human brain. It's also responsible for our attention, alertness, and pain sensation. Lastly, there's the medulla oblongata, which is the bottom part of the brainstem and therefore the lowest part of the human brain. It's responsible for organizing and handling our reflexive responses such as swallowing, coughing, sneezing, and vomiting. It's safe to say that running the brain isn't an easy task, and sometimes there are outside forces that make running the brain even harder. The National Institute of Neurological Disorder and Stroke published an article titled Traumatic Brain Injury, or TBI, and they said the term refers to an injury to the brain that occurs through an outside force. Said outside force could be a blow, a jolt, a bump, etc. The article organized TBI into primary and secondary injuries. To label an injury as primary means that the damage is immediate, and to label a brain injury as secondary means that the damage can come anywhere between a few hours or a few weeks after the injury occurs. The website also says that there are penetrating and non-penetrating traumatic brain injuries. Penetrating brain injuries, also called open brain injuries, are when something like a bullet, shrapnel, or even a fracture pierces the skull and therefore the brain. Non-penetrating brain injuries, also called blunt or closed brain injuries, are when something like a crash or a fall occurs, or let's say someone hits you in the head with a baseball bat. That's what happens. Now that we've established what TBI is, let's talk about some signs and symptoms. There are physical signs and symptoms, cognitive and behavioral signs and symptoms, and signs and symptoms that deal with our senses and sensations. Physical signs and symptoms include a headache, asymmetrical pupil dilation, nausea, and a loss in balance due to loss of feeling in our legs and arms. Cognitive and behavioral signs and symptoms include decreased consciousness, problems concentrating or remembering, or changes in our sleep cycles. Signs and symptoms that deal with our senses and sensations include sensitivity to light and or sound, blurred vision, lack of energy and or motivation, and ringing in the individual's ears. That was a lot of information, so let's conclude with a recap. Firstly, we talked about the 4 lobes of the brain, which are the frontal lobes, parietal lobes, temporal lobes, and occipital lobes. Following that, we talked about the deeper parts of the brain, the brainstem, which is the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Finally, we talked a little bit about traumatic brain injury and the signs and symptoms that arise. To understand the brain means to understand yourself a little better. Thank you.